Hi everyone, my name is Wim Van Lancker and I bring you one key message today in this short talk, and that is that we need to go back to universalism in our thinking about policies. And it's actually interesting because it's one of the longest standing questions in welfare state research, but certainly also in practice. Who should get what and why? To whom should we target our policies? Who should be included in certain support services that we deploy, the benefits that we implement? And since at least the 90s, and in academic circles with the publication of the Paradox of Redistribution by Corpy and Palmer, the wisdom is that, we need to do this universally. A universal welfare state actually works better for everyone, and particularly for poor people, because in the end, it will redistribute more and better. However, in our research, we clearly saw that universalism as a core principle sort of is getting out of fashion. We see that in many countries, actually in all of the countries included in the Resilience project, we see a move towards more targeting, towards policies and services that are tailored towards very specific groups. And if you do that, of course, you need to identify who those groups are. You need to delineate specific beneficiaries with all of the complexities involved in that. At the same time, we see, and it's not new, but it is a continuous move towards making work pay, towards seeing paid employment as the key or as the main way to achieve social integration. And the interesting thing is that actually those two objectives are often at odds. The more you target your policies to a very specific group, mainly low-income families, and the more you want to encourage paid work, that means that moving into work often means losing your benefit or your access to support services. So this is a problem, and this is in particularly a problem for many of the low-resourced families we have included or we have seen in our research project. And so our research clearly shows that in order to support family resilience, to make sure that families are actually able to absorb these shocks, that policies should be crafted on the basis of universalism. Again, and it simply means, very simple working definitions, should be available and accessible for all families. However, there's a flip side to this. And the flip side is the Matthew effect. And it's expressed by my favorite singer-songwriter, Leonard Cohen, in his song Everybody Knows. So please take notes of this so you can listen to it when you leave this conference. The poor stay poor, the rich get rich, right? This is the Matthew effect. The idea that many of the policies, many of the things we do, many of the services we implement actually benefit the middle and the higher income groups much more than they benefit the low-resourced families. And he is a bit of a pessimistic, he was a bit of a pessimistic fella. And so he ends with, that's how it goes, everybody knows. But, we should not take this for granted. This is not necessarily how it needs to go. But we need to think about universalism a bit different. We need to recalibrate universalism in order to be effective for low-resource families. Universalism does not mean that everyone should get exactly the same thing, that everyone should get the exact same benefit or the same sort of support. No. It means that it should be available to all families, but of course family needs differ. It should cater for those differences. Families make transitions all the time. It should take that into account. And families are not static, but dynamic. Shocks happen. And if you have a policy that is targeted, then the shock needs to happen. Then policies need to identify the shock and the effects of the shock and the needs of those families, and then implement a strategy to deal with those shocks. But if families are already included in a policy, it is much easier to deal with the dynamics of the shocks. And so what does this mean in practice? What does universalism mean for policies to support family resilience? We have done a lot of policy work in this project, and we will tell you about some of these results later on in the sessions. But I will give you three sort of mainstays of this. Right? And the first is financial support. We clearly see that there's a lot of evidence that universal child benefits, for instance, are much more perform much better than selective child benefits. In Spain and Croatia, for instance, we do not have universal child benefits, right? And so in order to be more effective to support family resilience, we need to universalize access to child benefits. But at the same time, within this universal framework, we can do much more to cater for the specific needs. For instance, families taking care for children with disabilities, low-resource families, larger families, single parents. That is perfectly possible within this universal framework. But we also need to think more in universal principles or adapt the universal principles for supported family-based transitions. We clearly see that leave policies are not accessible for everyone. Basically, they are grafted on employment, on your previous employment histories, which basically means that if a leave policy is not universal, it leads to Matthew effects because it tends to benefit the higher up in income distribution. And so actually universalizing access to leave policies remedies the Matthew effect. So it's not a flip side of it. It's actually a solution to it. And the same basically holds for service support. Think about childcare services. We know across the European Union, and certainly in the countries also included in this project, except for Sweden, that the use of childcare services is highly stratified. Low-resource families basically barely have access to affordable quality childcare services, which leads to this compounding of disadvantages over the life course. So again, we need to universalize, we need to open up the accessibility of childcare services, and this will in the end reduce inequalities instead of increasing it. So if there's one key message that you should take away from this conference, from this talk specifically, is that you need to listen again to Leonard Cohen. We should all listen more to Leonard Cohen, and that we need to go back to the roots of universalism if we're thinking about supporting family resilience. Thank you very much.